I never believed in the magic of dating sites until I met Marta. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where you're content to just exist. And I was idly swiping through profiles, not expecting much. That's when her profile popped up. Marta, 29, with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. Her bio was a mix of witty and sincere, and I found myself hitting the likes button without a second thought. To my surprise, we matched, and soon we were lost in conversation. Marta was everything I could have hoped for. Charming, intelligent, and with a warmth that felt genuine. We shared interests in old movies, indie music, and a love for Italian cuisine. Our chats would stretch for hours, and I found myself eagerly waiting for her messages. As days turned into weeks, our connection deepened. We met in person, and she was even more captivating. Her laughter was infectious, and her stories, filled with adventures and dreams, left me in awe. I remember walking her home after our third date, the city lights casting a soft glow around us, thinking, this is it. She's the one. Marta had this way of making me feel seen, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. She would often say, "You understand me like no one else does," and I believed her. I found myself opening up about my past, my hopes, and even my fears. It was a connection I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. One evening, as we sat in a cozy corner of our favorite cafe, Marta leaned in close and whispered, "I've never felt this way before. You make me so happy." Her eyes sparkled with sincerity, and in that moment, I knew I was falling for her. Hard. As weeks turned into months, the idea of spending my life with Marta didn't just feel right. It felt inevitable. I started to imagine proposing to her, picturing her face lighting up as I'd get down on one knee. The thought of a future together filled me with a sense of completeness I hadn't known I was missing. But as perfect as everything seemed, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. It was like a whisper, subtle yet persistent, hinting that not everything was as it appeared. Little did I know, this was just the calm before the storm. The more I got to know Marta, the more I felt like I was peeling back layers of an intricate mystery. It started with small inconsistencies, little things that didn't quite add up. She would tell me stories about her past, but the details would change slightly each time. I brushed these off as misremembered facts. After all, who doesn't embellish their past a little? But then, the discrepancies grew. She mentioned a child, a little boy named Liam from a previous relationship. I was surprised. She'd never mentioned him before. When I asked why, she brushed it off, saying it was a painful topic tied to a custody battle with her ex. I sympathized, offering support, but something in her eyes flickered, a shadow of something I couldn't quite place. As weeks passed, I began to see a different side of Marta. The charming, carefree woman I'd fallen for was increasingly possessive and manipulative. She'd get upset if I spent time with friends, or if I didn't reply to her messages immediately. "I just want us to be together, all the time," she'd say, her voice laced with a desperation that made me uneasy. I started to dig deeper into her past, driven by a mix of concern and curiosity. The more I uncovered, the more the image of the perfect woman I'd fallen for crumbled. Friends she'd mentioned didn't seem to exist. Stories about her past achievements and experiences unraveled into a web of lies. I felt like I was living in a twisted reality where nothing I knew about her was true. The turning point came one evening at her apartment. We were looking through old photos, and I stumbled upon a picture of her with a man and a child, a family portrait. When I asked about it, her demeanor changed instantly. She snatched the photo away, her eyes darkening. "You shouldn't have seen that," she hissed, her voice barely recognizable. That night, I lay awake, piecing together the puzzle of Marta's life. The charming facade, the lies, the possessiveness. It all pointed to something deeply unsettling. I realized I was in a relationship with a stranger, a stranger who was becoming increasingly unpredictable and dangerous. As dawn broke, I knew what I had to do, but I was unprepared for the depth of Marta's deception and the lengths she would go to keep me in her life. I was about to enter a nightmare that would test the very limits of my sanity. The decision to end things with Marta was one of the hardest I've ever made. I thought it would be the end of the nightmare, but it was just the beginning. The day after I told her it was over, the stalking began. It started with constant messages and calls. When I blocked her number, she found other ways to reach me. Emails, social media, messages through friends. Then she started appearing everywhere. I'd see her outside my office, lingering near my car, or sitting in a cafe across from my apartment. Each sighting sent chills down my spine. Her presence was like a dark cloud, looming over my every move. One night, I came home to find her sitting on my doorstep. Her eyes were wild, her hair disheveled. "We're meant to be together," she insisted, her voice trembling. "You can't just throw away what we have." I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. It was as if she was living in a different reality. The encounters grew more frequent and more disturbing. She would leave notes on my car, send me photos of places I'd been that day, and once I even found her inside my apartment. The police became a regular part of my life, but they could only do so much. Get a restraining order, they advised. But even that seemed like a flimsy shield against her obsession. The climax came on a cold, rainy night. I was alone at home when I heard a knock at the door. It was Marta, but she was different this time. Her usual desperation was replaced by a calm, eerie resolve. She held a knife in her hand, its blade glinting in the dim porch light. "You don't get to leave me," she said, her voice eerily calm. "If I can't have you, no one can." What followed was a blur of terror and survival. I managed to lock myself in the bathroom, calling the police as I heard her trying to break down the door. The minutes until the police arrived were the longest of my life, filled with the sound of her manic screams and the thud of the knife against the door. When the police finally arrived, they found her sitting on the floor, sobbing, the knife lying beside her. As they took her away, her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of rage and sorrow. It was the last time I saw her. That night, I survived, but something inside me was irreparably broken. The woman I had once loved had become my worst nightmare, and the scars she left were not just physical but deep in my psyche. The days following Marta's arrest were a haze. I moved through them like a ghost, haunted by the memories of what had transpired. The apartment where we had shared so many moments felt like a prison, each room echoing with the remnants of a love that had turned into terror. I struggled to reconcile the Marta I had known with the one who had stood in my doorway, knife in hand. The woman I had planned to propose to had become a stranger, her actions driven by a madness I couldn't comprehend. The police said I was lucky to be alive, but survival felt like a heavy burden. Sleep was elusive, chased away by nightmares that replayed the night of the attack over and over. I would wake up in a cold sweat, her screams still ringing in my ears. Friends and family tried to offer comfort, but their words felt hollow. How could they understand the depth of fear and betrayal I felt? In the weeks that followed, I sought therapy, trying to piece together my shattered psyche. The therapist listened as I recounted the story, from the blissful beginnings to the harrowing end. "You were caught in a web of manipulation," she said. "It's not your fault." But guilt gnawed at me. Had I ignored the red flags? Had my desire for love blinded me to the truth? As I worked through the trauma, I began to see how Marta's need for control and adoration had twisted our relationship. She had craved praise and attention, manipulating reality to fit her narrative. I had been a character in her story, one she refused to let go even as the plot spiraled out of control. The road to recovery was long and arduous. I learned to trust again, but more importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. The scars, both physical and emotional, would always be a part of me, a reminder of the dangers of ignoring the warning signs. Now, as I sit here, reflecting on that chapter of my life, I feel a sense of relief. Relief that it's over, that I survived. But there's also a lingering sadness for the Marta I thought I knew, for the love that could have been but was lost in the shadows of her madness. I've moved on, but the experience has left an indelible mark on me. It's a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are not under our beds or in the dark alleys. Sometimes they are the ones we invite into our hearts, not knowing their true nature until it's too late.